All right. So here we are in our final evening on St. Francis, and we've been on a little bit of a journey, and I just spent the last 2 hours reading different books about St. Francis, and we're in for a treat tonight because tonight it all comes together in that final absorption into God consciousness. You know, all along the way, one of the things that I think we've been talking about, if we go all the way back to our first week together, one of the things that helps us to resonate with St. Francis, it's not only just the openness of his heart and that charity of kindness that he showed, but we see so much of ourselves, I think, reflected in him, you know, just in even some of the moments when we watch this journey from kind of a somewhat materialistic, worldly young man into the saint. You know, each one of us, we're on that arc and on that journey, and we're going to end in that same place that St. Francis does, no matter how many lifetimes it may take us to get there. So the arc of that journey is, it's a beautiful allegory, as are all of the saints. They're just so perfectly wrapped up. Actually, and can I ask a favor of you? Can you grab me the Whispers book back there? Because there was a beautiful Whispers, if I can find it quickly, I'll grab it, that I saw the other day, that Yogananda, a prayer demand that Yogananda wrote, just, you know, a prayer demand asking us to open our hearts and to learn from each of the saints. So I'll look for it while we're chanting so I don't ruin the flow of our evening, and then we'll read it after we chant. But, you know, the lives of each of the saints, and for those of you that have been with us all through November and now December, where we've studied a number of different saints along the way, we see that same, you know, allegory that's presented to us. The awakening, it just comes back to the Festival of Light and that little bird that we read about each week, the mission, the quest, you know, the redemption, all of these different phases. And tonight is an exciting evening for us because we get to come to the redemption, and we get to come to the final experiences in Francis's life where we watch those last traces of ego just dissolve into God consciousness. And there's that complete merging of himself into divine consciousness. You know, I was speaking to James right before we started tonight, saying that, of course, it's true because the lives of saints are the lives of God and the lives of the divine threaded through the human experience. But the lives of the saints are so poetic. And we see that with St. Francis. I was even reading about his death tonight, which we'll speak about a little in more detail in a bit. But he demanded of his brothers who were there with him at his death, that after he died, that he's stripped naked and left to lie, that his naked body is left to lie on the floor for a little while so that he can return to his divine maker in that naked, vulnerable form. And the book that I was reading was bringing us back to the moment of when he's in the piazza and he rejects his father, his earthly father, and accepts only his heavenly father, and he strips down naked in front of the bishop. And he says, "Here I am, I have one father. I shall only refer to my Father in heaven." And that's the first moment of his journey stepping into that God consciousness. And at the end, here he is again, just stripped naked. And that metaphor, that symbolism for each one of us of what it would be like to stand in front of Divine Mother, stripped of the ego, stripped of all our desires, stripped of everything that keeps us bound and held back, and just the courage and the love that it takes to be willing to stand in front of the divine with that vulnerability, with that complete self-offering. And so that's the journey that we get to take tonight. So we'll go out of order a little bit. We'll begin with a chant, and then I'll grab that whisper, and we'll have our whisper in just a few minutes of meditation. Then we'll tell a few stories, and tonight we get to do a lot of singing. So everyone in the audience who needs one should have lyrics, and at home, most of you will be able to find them or know them. But, you know, Francis's life was a song, and so tonight we'll honor him by singing together and feeling his journey through song. So.
You can
so calm. She can't remain hidden anymore. She can't remain hidden anymore. Come out of the silent sky. Come out of the mountain glen. Come out of the silent sky. Come out of the mountain glen. Come out of my secret soul, Mother, come out of my secret soul. Come out of my cave of silence, of my cave of silence. Mother, I give thee my soul, 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 calm. You can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore.
Give my mother a soul, 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 calm. She can't remain hidden anymore. She can't remain hidden anymore. Come out of the silent sky. Come out of the mountain glen. Come out of the silent sky. Come out of the mountain glen. Come out of my secret soul, Mother, come out of my secret soul. Come out of my cave of silence. Come out of my cave of silence. Mother, I give thee my soul, 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 calm. You can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. Give my mother a soul, 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 calm. She can't remain hidden anymore. She can't remain hidden anymore. Come out of the silent sky. Come out of the mountain glen. Come out of the silent sky. Come out of the mountain glen. Come out of my secret soul, Mother. Come out of my secret soul. Come out of my cave of silence. Come out of my cave of silence. Come out of the silent sky. Come out of the mountain glen. Come out of the silent sky. Come out of the mountain glen. Come out of my secret soul, Mother. Come out of my secret soul. Come out of my secret soul, Mother. Come out of my secret soul. Come out of my cave of silence. Come out of my cave of silence. Come out of my cave of silence. Mother, I give thee my soul, 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 calm. You can't remain hidden anymore. You can't remain hidden anymore. She can't remain hidden anymore. She can't remain hidden
This is Yogananda's prayer demand, number 90. Demand to love God as all saints have loved him. O Heavenly Father, fill my heart daily with the prayers and loves of some new saint who found thee in ages bygone. Fill my heart with the love of all saints who have ever loved and found thee. Sit in meditation for just a minute or two, tuning in and calling upon the presence of each of the masters, of all the saints and sages of all religions, and particularly of St. Francis, feeling him in our heart. peace. Amen. You know, last week, when Shanti was sharing with us, she was exploring different qualities that St. Francis embodied: humility and joy and self-sacrifice and service. And, you know, as I was contemplating and just reflecting on what she shared last week and this middle part of his life and all of the miracles that he performed in the gathering of his brothers and the creation of the Franciscan order, and he meets Claire, and who of course founds the Poor Clares and the sister organization to his Franciscan order. And you know, all of these qualities that he expressed outwardly in all of the miracles and exchanges and interactions that he had in his life, as we come to the last few years of his life, we'll really be exploring just the last 4 years of his life now and 2 major events that happened. We watch how all of those qualities that he was expressing so beautifully outwardly and sharing with the world and sharing through miracles and through touching people individually and offering that sense of non-judgment and that sense of open-heartedness to everyone that he meets, those qualities begin to translate and deepen into that inner connection with the divine. And we watch how humility evolves as he begins to withdraw more and more from the world and begins to spend more time in solitude, more time in contemplation, what he called contemplation with the divine. We would probably call it meditation, but the same aspect of that ability to separate from the world, to quiet our energy, to draw it in, and to feel that deepening attunement with the divine. And it comes with a thread of exploration. You know, St. Francis was always speaking about the sorrows of Christ. He was always speaking about, let me feel the pain that you felt. Let me experience the sorrows that you felt. And he, of course, in some of the stories that Shanti was sharing last week, we can see that he was also somewhat like self-degrading along the way. If you read books and you hear words, he would always say, oh, here I am, just this poor little worm. And the self, you know, he would ask his brother monks to admonish him publicly when he had done something wrong or misbehaved in certain ways. And for us, particularly those of us that tune into these masters and to Yogananda, that can feel a little bit different than the way that we relate to the divine, where we are at Ananda, where God is ever present, ever conscious, ever new bliss and joy, and there's such a sense of upliftment. And I was sitting with that this week as I was contemplating the life of Francis, because as we'll see as we hear particularly about his death, all of these experiences were threaded with joy. In fact, at one point, after he receives the stigmata, the marks of Christ, he is coming down off of the mountain and he's speaking with one of his brother monks. And he says that, let me see if I can pull up exactly what it is, otherwise I'll just paraphrase it. But he essentially said that, I feel, you know, pain does not exist because even the experience of pain is joy, because I know that it's rooted in the divine. And as I was contemplating how we can, you know, how we can interact with that contemplation of the sorrows of Christ and the wounds and all of the pain, you know, in a sense, when the ego is being dissolved, there's a process of tearing away. The ego wants to glob on. The ego wants to stay right here, right present with us. The ego is fighting as hard as it can to say, no, this is my place. I'm going to stand firmly in this spot. And it takes such energy and such joy, and it takes such a force of willpower in order to begin to let that ego go. And I think all along that process, what we see in the midst of all of the what looks like struggle on the outside in the context of St. Francis's life, underneath it was that force of joy, because at each of those steps in the midst of the struggle, the ego was letting go more and more and more. And some of the stories we'll talk about tonight are experiences that he has where he's tempted by the devil. He's tempted by that force of Maya, that force that's saying, no, we are separate. You are firmly rooted here. Your ego is present. He calls, at one point, he says that his greatest enemy is his body, because the body is the greatest example for most of us that we have, that I'm here and I'm separate from you. even the mind, a lot of us think, we like our mind. Our mind tells us who we are, but even you can say, wow, I agree with this person, I resonate with that person, but my body's here and Chidambar's body is there, and that's the firmest root that we have. And they're one of the firmest one of the most firmly rooted experiences that we have, that the ego's outside of ourselves. And so as we hear some of the stories tonight, what I was noticing along the way and what we'll share, and we'll start with the first story which is the story of the first creche scene, which is why we often celebrate St. Francis at Christmas time. But you can see that he enters into the experience with the prayer, let me feel the pain and the sorrow. But what he experiences there is only the experience of joy. And that's such a beautiful lesson for us, and that's where I'll begin. You guys can see I was very excited when I walked into the temple today because our baby Jesus has made his appearance. He only comes out at Christmas time, and we get to awaken him, and this little baby is so well loved, and he's spent years here on our dais being loved and held and worshipped in the same way that in the Hindu culture we would worship a Murti, and it's been infused with the power of God. And so I walked in with James today and I said, baby Jesus is here. And of course James had the perfect response, which is baby Jesus is always here. But he's really here now, and we can hold him. And at the end of class, or even in the middle of class, whenever the mood strikes you, feel free to just walk on up and just go and look at that sweet little baby and to feel that energy. And the first creche scene, so St. Francis is attributed with the first creche scene. And when I was reading about that today, Sai Ganesh sent out a little article about it in his weekly blog. And it was very sweet to read. He goes up into the hills and he finds this perfect little cave, and he goes in and he starts to recreate the creche scene. And it says that the reason that he wanted to do this was because he wanted to be in tune with the pain and the suffering that this little baby had to experience being born into the barn and being placed in the manger and sleeping among the hay. And he wanted to have a real life, to get as close to that experience of what it was like at the birth of Christ as he could. So he was recreating it because he wanted to watch it with his own eyes. But what's beautiful about this story is that it says that at the moment that he looked at the little baby that he'd recreated there and placed in this manger, all he could feel was the love and the joy that was present in the divine. And so at the root of all of that seeking, every time that St. Francis dove into the craving for the experience of knowing God, of feeling the joy and the pain and the sorrow of Christ, what he finds there is that heart wide open joy. And it's the same thing you can experience if you walk up onto that altar and you just pick up that little baby. You can't help but look into his eyes and feel that same joy. Because just as James was saying so beautifully earlier today, the baby Jesus, or Jesus, that Christ consciousness, that experience of samadhi, of knowing that we are one with the divine, that experience, when we are lifted up into God consciousness, it's always accompanied with bliss. It's always accompanied with joy. And it was the first experience in this series here at the end of his life that really starts to set him off on this journey of realizing and attuning to the divine. And so to go on from there, I wanted to share a little bit about the history of probably one of the most prominent experiences in St. Francis's life, which is receiving the stigmata. And we spoke a little bit about it the first week that I was here with you. You can still go to this mountain. The mountain is called La Verna in Italy. It's about 2 hours or so outside of Assisi, maybe a little less, and you can drive right up to the top of it. Now there's a beautiful monastery there, and there's a path that takes you up to the summit of the mountain. It's not a big, intense summit. It's a very sweet little walk up. And they have a beautiful chapel there, and you can walk around, of course, as they've done now in all of these sacred sites, they've built these beautiful temples and chapels all around all of these sacred places. But you can walk into the chapel of the stigmata, and you can stand and kneel right in front of, they have this rock that's encased in glass, and it's the site where St. Francis was standing when he received this experience of Christ, when he received the experience of the stigmata. And you can actually walk down. Jyoti's not here tonight, but I have a fun story when we went there. there is a secret door, which is not locked. So we're testing that you were allowed to go in there, but it's not necessarily wide open and inviting. But there's a secret door off to the side that you can open up and walk down, and then you're actually underneath the chapel, and so the rock is exposed underneath, so you can go into this little kind of secret doorway and just walk down, and then you can just put your hands right on that rock, on the bottom side of the rock where it's exposed. And so we went in there, and we were in there meditating for about an hour or so, and then we heard a big boom and slam, and we both just like that human instinct, we both looked at each other, and we went running up the stairs, and they'd closed it because they were having a procession. So we thought we might be trapped in the Chapel of the Stigmata for days, weeks, years. We had no idea, but it ended up being just a few minutes. But that was one of the most profound experiences of being that close to the place where St. Francis received the stigmata, to the place where he was in that communion with the divine. And I'm telling you all of these places because you'll hear all these stories, and then you can walk out, and there's a little railing that you can follow around to a rock that is a sheer rock with just a little tiny ledge. And the story here is this is the site where St. Francis was being tempted by the devil for the second time on the mountain of Laverna. And he turns around and faces the rock and puts his hands up, and he's praying to God to help him because the devil is trying to push him off of this cliff. And as he's praying to the divine, the rock begins to take the form of wax, and the imprint of his hands and his face is in the rock, and you can walk around to the little ledge and you can put your hands just right there where St. Francis was tempted by the devil, tempted by that Maya, that force of Maya that's telling us we're separate. And I'm sharing these stories and many more as we take this journey up to the mountain of Laverna and to receiving the stigmata in his life, because again, it brings us back to the allegory of our own lives, because the saints are a mirror for each one of us wherever we are on that journey. And as we get closer to realizing our true selves, as we get closer to realizing our oneness with God, who we truly are, then that force of Maya gets stronger. And I'm sure we've experienced it, right? As soon as we dive more deeply into our own spiritual practices, the challenges tend to just blossom all around us. And there are things that want to keep us in our path. We may not be as viscerally tempted as Jesus is, before he goes off, before he returns to Jerusalem and is crucified, or as St. Francis is before he receives the stigmata. We may not be there on the ledge, literally trying to be being pushed off a ledge by that satanic force, but we're always being pushed off the ledge, and we're always being asked to just turn around and with great faith push into that rock and say, move this rock, move all of these challenges, help me to be more in tune, to be more in flow, to know God more resolutely. And so the story, just to begin, where we start with the story of Laverna and the mountain, and then ultimately the stigmata. And as I said, you'll hear and see all of the poetry that's woven into this great experience in St. Francis's life. So the mountain itself, Laverna, was a gift from a count named Count Orlando. And when St. Francis was traveling and preaching with all of his brothers, they heard about a festival that was happening where there were a number of noblemen who were going to be there. So St. Francis says, let's go and let's offer our energy and share the teachings with all of these great noblemen. And Count Orlando is one of the men who is there, and he was so touched by St. Francis and his sharing that he asked for a private audience with St. Francis, and he said, I'd like to speak with you about the salvation of my soul. And we don't know exactly what transpired in that conversation, but at the end of it, the Count was so moved that he said, I own a mountain. And again, at this point, there was nothing there but just the mountain and caves and all of these little nooks and crannies where St. Francis could go and seclude. And he said, it's a perfect place for seclusion, for solitude and contemplation, and I'd like to offer it to you. And St. Francis gladly accepts, and after realizing that it's a suitable place for contemplation, he goes to the mountain. And because all along he's beginning to hear and to know from Divine Mother, from God, that the end of his life is coming, and he can feel it, that something powerful is coming. And so this is the first part of the story that's so poetic. Just want to make sure I get it all right. he takes three brothers with him when he goes to Laverna, and each of these brothers represent something different. The first brother that he brings with him is Brother Masio, and Brother Masio was the embodiment of wisdom. He was very wise, so he was what we would call a jnana yogi, finding truth through wisdom. And then he takes Brother Angelo with him, who was of noble birth and represented and was just the embodiment of nobility. And then he takes Brother Leo, who was his closest confidant with him. And Brother Leo was, St. Francis had such a sweet love for Brother Leo because Brother Leo was so simple and really represented simplicity, poverty, lady poverty, as St. Francis called it. And I just thought that that was so beautiful and poetic that here he is and he's starting off on this journey to receive Christ consciousness. And he brings with him wisdom, nobility, and simplicity. Three qualities that are so powerful with each one of us. And here he is traveling up the mountain, again, just hearing all of the allegories that are present in there. And he's carrying on his journey as he's going to meet God, wisdom, simplicity, nobility, those qualities that we get to honor in ourselves. And all along the way, at first they're on this journey, and one night, they were just sleeping wherever they could find a place to sleep. And one night, the weather was getting very bad, and so they found just a rundown, dilapidated church, and they decided to spend the night in the church. And the three brothers all go to sleep, and St. Francis is awake, and he's in prayer, preparing himself for what he knows is coming. At this point, the way that these are the two books that I was reading today that I'm pulling from, just in case any of you are interested. And they're both very sweet. The first one is The Life of St. Francis by St. Bonaventure, who spent some of his life with St. Francis. And The Little Flowers of St. Francis are stories from his brothers. So they're very sweet because they're firsthand accounts of what happened throughout his life. And so all of the brothers fall asleep, and St. Francis stays up in prayer and in contemplation, praying for strength and courage to continue on the journey that he knows is coming. And he says that one of the brothers in the middle of the night wakes up and he sees Francis being attacked by different demons. And all of these demons are just pulling him in different directions and just sort of thrashing his body around. And in the midst of it, he's calling out to God in the midst of this thrashing. And he's saying to these devils, to these demons, he's saying to them, do whatever you want. My body belongs to God. Whatever God, you are in manifestation of God. Whatever God wants to do with this body is his. It is his. And at that, it says at that moment that these demons, they take control even more, and they really begin to thrash him and lift him around the church. And his stalwart focus on Divine Mother, his stalwart focus, and that's where he finally says, this body is my greatest enemy. Whatever God wants to do with it is his. And in that moment, in that strength, all of that force of Maya, all of that force of evil that's trying to keep him from his true destiny, it just dissolves and it all disappears. And I thought that was such a beautiful representation, because here he is, first he's taking along his journey wisdom, simplicity, and nobility, and now he's giving up the body. So just along the way, he's surrendering these aspects of himself that are keeping him separate from the divine all along that journey. So here we are, we haven't even started our journey up the mountain to Laverna to receive the stigmata, but he's just dropping these various aspects. And so he continues on. And at this point, he knows something is coming, but he wasn't quite sure what it was. And so after this experience, they continue on their journey. And the next night that he's stopping, he opens the Bible, the Gospels, 3 times. And each time that he opens the Gospel, he lands on the same verse, which is the Passion of the Christ, which for those of you that weren't raised Catholic or Christian, the Passion of the Christ is the crucifixion of the Christ. So 3 times he's meditating and praying and contemplating, and he opens to the Passion of the Christ, and he realizes in that moment what it is that he's going to Laverna to do, what it is that he's going to Laverna to receive. And so now he's really preparing himself, and you can feel the allegories. For those of you that are familiar with the life of Christ, we see something similar where he goes into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, and he is tempted by the devil there, and then he has to return to Jerusalem prepared to complete his life's mission, to complete his journey, which of course is the crucifixion. And so we see these parallels coming as he's tuning more and more into the divine. And at this moment, he prays, he has such a beautiful prayer. And I wanted to read it, and then we'll summarize it a little bit. And he says, Lord Jesus Christ, I pray you grant me 2 graces before I die. The first is that during my life, I may feel in my soul and in my body as much as possible the pain which you, dear Jesus, sustained in the hour of your most bitter passion. The second is that I may feel in my heart as much as possible the excessive love with which you, O Son of God, were inflamed in willingly enduring such suffering for us sinners. And it's such a beautiful prayer, because what is he praying? He's praying in this moment, I want to know you so deeply, so intimately. I want to feel all of your pain and suffering and all of your joy and love. That's what he's experiencing, and that's his prayer. Before I die, let me know you so intimately. Let me be so in tune with your vibration, with your consciousness, that I feel all that you experienced, everything that you experienced. And again, it reminds me, we spoke about this the first night again, of the experience that Saint Teresa has, and there's a beautiful sculpture of it in one of the famous churches in Rome, where she's praying to the divine, and an angel comes and pierces her heart. And she said in that moment, she's hit with all of the pain and all of the ecstasy of what it means to surrender completely to God. And so this echo, this experience that we had, that each one of us will go through, and I was reading today and just thinking how grateful I am that we have Yogananda, who doesn't focus on the pain of it, but focuses on the ecstasy of it, to dissolve your ego slowly through each Kriya breath, through each meditation, to offer yourself. It reminds me, there's a disciple of Yogananda, someone will remember her name, it's leaving me right now, who prayed to Master, to Yogananda, and said, let me experience all my karma in this lifetime. That's Kamala, thank you, I couldn't remember, Kamala Silva. And and she had a lot of karma in her life, a lot of body karma, a lot of things that happened to her, and we always sort of joked, who's going to be brave enough to make that prayer? Let me experience all my karma in this lifetime. But there's also such a beauty to it and what that represents for each one of us. And just the prayer to even just sit with that. Again, that's what I was speaking to, with the courage to stand stripped, completely vulnerable in front of the divine. Just to even imagine for a moment the courage. I want to know you so completely. Let me feel all of your pain, all of your joy. Because of course we know that's what these great masters feel. Yogananda tells us stories of, about dreams that he's having, where in one moment he's a soldier dying on a battlefield, and the next moment he's back in his meditation room, and then he's again dying on the battlefield, and he's back in his meditation room. And somebody once said, imagine what it was like for a great master like Yogananda. He lived on this earth through many wars, through many world wars, all of the tragedy, all of the pain. They're not numb to that. They experience all of that. It's all brought in and experienced and offered up into the divine. And I think that's part of what we can take away from these experiences that St. Francis is having, or that St. Teresa is having, and just that prayer and that ability to say, Lord, I want to know you so deeply. Divine Mother, I want to know you so deeply. Let me feel everything, that I may dissolve into nothing. It's such a powerful wish. And after having this and offering this prayer, that's when he receives the experience of the stigmata. So it says, again, he goes into deep contemplation and gets very, very quiet and prepares for it. And in this experience of the stigmata itself, what comes to him is a 6-winged angel. So an angel with 6 wings, and she opens up her wings, and right in the very center is Christ on the cross, floating right in the center of her wings. And the tales that are told of this, because there were some of his brothers who were witnessing this experience, or Brother Leo in particular, who was experiencing this, he said that when St. Francis described it, he looked into the eyes of Christ and he felt that kinship, that friendship. He was so touched and moved to see the eyes of Christ, who was his dear friend. And at the same time, he was so moved by with compassion by seeing this image of him on the cross and the crucifixion. And again, just weaving that story for each one of us that's threaded into it. And in that moment, he has the experience that and you can see it depicted in so many images. He has the experience that he begins to get the wounds on his hands, on his feet, and he had a wound on his side. And it's interesting, he hid the wounds for most of his life. Some of his brothers were aware of them. Brother Leo was the only person that he would allow to actually tend to the wounds and rewrap them. Nobody else was actually able to touch the wounds themselves. But some of the other brothers would see them, but for the most part, he hid them. And it's interesting, the life of Padre Pio, who is another more modern day saint. He died in the 1960s, so not that long ago, and also received the stigmata. He also wore gloves for the rest of his life and was hiding them, again, not out of shame, but what our stories tell us, what our storytellers are telling us, that it was out of that, it's such an intimate connection with the divine. It's such a tangible representation of God's presence in this world, and that it's something to be respected, and it's something sacred. And so what happens after he receives the stigmata, he leaves Laverna and goes back down. He's headed home. Now he knows that his life really is coming to an end. So he's moving down the mountain. And there are so many stories of profound miracles. Of course, there were miracles before this happened, but just that's what I mean. There was a shift that happened in this moment as his energy was withdrawn more inward. There was one story where there was a plague that was oppressing the cattle in the area surrounding the mountain. And one of the shepherds got the intuition that said, go to the monastery and take the water that St. Francis was washing his hands in and sprinkle it over the cows. And so he goes and he takes the water after St. Francis, who has received this sacred stigmata, has washed his hands in this, and he sprinkles it over the cows, and the cows that are all lying sick and dying, they just stand up and walk and all go back out to pasture. Or there's a story of, because when the stigmata occurred, there were two other things that I forgot to share that I wanted to share. When the moment that he received the stigmata, all of the mountain of Laverna lit up. And it was glowing. And so all of the shepherds and villagers in the surrounding areas, they saw this. There's even a story that says some of the shepherds, they thought that the sun had come up. So they woke up all their cattle, and they started moving their cattle because they thought that it was sunrise, only to find that as soon as the mountain de-illuminated, is that a word? De-illuminated? As soon as it was no longer lit up, then they realized it was still the middle of the night. And so this wasn't a secret, what was happening here. And one of the other stories that I forgot to share, so it's a little bit out of order, when St. Francis and these three brothers first started spending time on the mountains, and he did a lot of time in seclusion. He created a lot of little spaces called cells where he would go and spend time in deep contemplation and fasting and seclusion. And at one point he was on a quiet walk, and he spent time meditating, and then he was just standing and staring at this big rock with a crack right down the middle of it. And Brother Leo was watching him from a distance and later asked him what he was doing standing and staring at that rock. And what St. Francis told him is the message that came was that this crack was created at the moment that Christ was crucified. And that crack in that rock was created because it knew, or time knew, that one day this would be the site where St. Francis would receive the stigmata. And so there's that connection there, that at the moment that Christ was crucified, this crack, there's even a line from the Bible. It says in the Bible, in the book of John, the rock splits, and that's actually a reference to what's happening here, or at least that was the interpretation, I should say, of one of the books that I was reading. But he's staring at this, and he's recognizing it and knowing what's about to happen. And just with all of that stalwart energy, with that courage, with that bravery, goes deeper into contemplation, deeper into fasting, to purify himself, to prepare himself to receive the stigmata. And again, on the other side of that, we see just like Christ, they became one. The miracles were just pouring out of him as he's walking down the hill. To come back to why I was sharing that, the villagers all saw what was happening, so they knew something miraculous had happened. And so as Francis and his brothers were moving back through the town, they all flooded out to come and see him. And one woman, she brought her 8-year-old son, who had been sick for 8 years with dropsy, and his belly was totally inflamed. And St. Francis, she asks him to pray over him, and St. Francis prays over him, and nothing happens. And then the moment his hands, again with this mark of Christ, touch the little boy's belly, his belly deflates, he's well, he stands up, and he's running around. And just so many stories. There was hailstorms that were ruining all of the crops and in the surrounding villages around the mountain Laverna. And after the stigmata, the reception of the stigmata, all of it stopped. The crops were thriving, and so the whole land was just touched and overwhelmed and uplifted by this experience. Because of course we know that any time Christ's consciousness descends, that any time the divine consciousness descends, that all of us are impacted, that the whole area, the whole space is impacted. It's the same thing that, we say this is why we go on pilgrimage and we visit sacred sites. This is why we go to Encinitas, for any of you who have been to Encinitas or to Lake Shrine or any of the areas where Yogananda lived, and you can walk these same paths that he was walking, because any time that a great saint, that divine consciousness has stepped, that imprint of divinity is right there. And if we're open to it, if we're receptive to it, then we get to feel that as well. And so we can feel that even on Laverna. And I was just thinking, of course, nature, which has no ego, which is just so completely open and always in a state of receptivity. Nature is always looking to the light. It's always looking to open to the sun. So it's a beautiful lesson for us when that ego isn't there. Of course, nature would be receptive immediately to feeling that. And so, too, do we get to be receptive to that? I was just reading an article that Swami Kriyananda wrote, and he said in it that in the world today, the way we study is with our intellect. We open a book and we read it, but the way that a yogi studies is to deepen his receptivity. And that's such a beautiful lesson for us. It doesn't mean we don't want to read and learn and take in knowledge with the mind, but that if the heart isn't open, the knowledge is obsolete to us. That we have to want that experience, to crave that experience of the divine. And that's what comes to us through the life of St. Francis and the experience of the stigmata. I'm going to stop talking here in just a minute so that we can sing a little bit more and really feel that, because there are 2 songs that we're going to sing in response to the story of the stigmata. And the first one is, "This is my son," and I'll just read the lines to you, and anyone who needs lyrics will give you one, because our singers will sing for us first, and then we'll all be able to sing together to dive deeply into it. But just listen to these lines. "This is my son, in whom I am well pleased. Not of himself remains, naught but the true light." This is the story of Francis coming down from the mountain. There was nothing left in Francis after receiving that stigmata. His prayer, "Let me be so attuned to you that I feel everything that you are, that I am one with you." Not of himself remains, to dissolve the ego completely. Then heed well his words, "The way he shows is my way. All who would find the truth, walk where he leads." And that's such a beautiful thing. Just one more story. I had Sai Ganesh stand up, but one more story came to mind. I always do this to Sai Ganesh. I tell him we're going to sing, and then I keep talking. But there's one beautiful story. After St. Francis received the stigmata, one of his brothers says to him, "What did Jesus say to you when you were in communion in that moment?" And Francis's response, he's reluctant at first, but he ultimately tells the story to his brothers, who then published it. So I don't know, that was all probably part of the divine plan. But what he says is that what that divine consciousness revealed to him, the words that he used were, and I'll say them and then I'll explain them a little bit more, at least my interpretation of them, that every year on the anniversary of receiving the stigmata, you will have the ability to enter into limbo, enter into purgatory, again, to use these Christian words because that was what it was coming through, but to enter into that in-between space and gather all of those souls who are following you, all of those souls who want to know you, and to lift them up into paradise. And really, what does that mean? That when we are one with that divine consciousness, the moment that he received that complete union, then we have the ability to liberate and to uplift souls. That here again, what is the purgatory or the limbo? That's where each one of us are. Here we are, right? Stuck in the in-between in these worlds. And what does the guru do? What does the teacher do? The teacher comes to lift us up, to show us the way, to teach us how to live so that we too can receive that divine consciousness. And so those are the words again. Heed well his words. The way he shows is my way. All who would find the truth, walk where he leads. I thought, of course, this song wasn't written for Francis, but it's such a beautiful explanation of what we get to take away from Francis. And so we'll sing that, and then I think we'll sing the second one, because I've been talking a lot as well. So I'll just share some lyrics with those of you who need them, and we'll sing a little, if you want to sing. Or you can just close your eyes and listen. What note am I saying? C. This is my son, in whom I am well pleased. Not of himself remains, not but the true light. Heed well his words, the way he shows is my way. All who would find the truth, walk where he leads. This is my son, in whom I am well pleased. Not of himself remains, not but the true light. Heed well his words, the way he shows is my way. All who would find the truth, walk where he leads. I was caught up in ecstasy. 'Twas a day sanctified by God. There he showed me the truths of heaven, truths which all seeking him should know. How the soul made to live in freedom can reclaim its eternal right. How the night born of our delusions can be fired blazing with his light. I was caught up in ecstasy. 'Twas a day sanctified by God. There he showed me the truths of heaven, truths which all seeking him should know. How the soul made to live in freedom can reclaim its eternal right. How the night born of our delusions can be fired waiting for him to turn the camera back. Everyone in the room is waiting patiently for why I'm sitting here. You know, these Swami Kriyananda's music, it's so heart-opening for us on so many levels. And, you know, it's just sitting here, of course, after speaking for 45 minutes straight, I was thinking, of course, we always come to it, and I think I could have just said to us, let's just sing 4 songs and meditate and tune into the life of St. Francis, because that, of course, it's summarized so beautiful here, even in our second song, In the Spirit. I was caught up in ecstasy. 'Twas a day sanctified by God. There he showed me the truths of heaven, truths which all seeking him should know. I mean, it's just so beautiful as we feel that spiral staircase, that ladder that we're climbing, just like the mountain of Laverna that we're climbing up closer and closer to being able to offer that prayer. Let me feel everything. Let me know everything. Let me dissolve completely into our eternal right, just to pull a line from the story, or from the lyrics itself. And so this brings us, we won't speak much longer because we have a real treat coming soon that Sai Ganesh is going to sing for us, and then we'll end with another all sing. Because again, the best way to honor Francis is to sing out, and that brings us to really just a very brief story about the end of his life. You know, after this experience, St. Francis only lived for 2 more years after receiving the stigmata, and his body, Brother Donkey, as he called his body took a great toll. He was already weak prior to this because, again, you know, what we can see and what I would guess based on the experiences we see from other great masters and saints and teachers, saints often take on the karma of their disciples and the karma of others around them, which is why their bodies can often be in so much outward turmoil. And he was really, his body suffered and struggled quite a bit, and then you know, now he's carrying these wounds that were constantly, again, people couldn't see them very often, but all of the stories say that as his brothers were washing his clothes, really just the one set of robes that he would wear, after this he started wearing undergarments more because there was an experience where someone was helping him to stand up, and they would accidentally touch his wounds and things like that. So he started to practice modesty in a different way to protect the wounds, but all by way of saying, when the brothers would wash his clothing, they were just soiled with blood because these wounds were constantly bleeding, and they were always open wounds, and he was treating them and tending to them. And so as he went up the mountain, understanding and knowing that the end of his life was coming, and then leaving from that experience, really the last few years of his life were just about deepening, preparing more and more for that experience of ultimately leaving his body and merging back into the divine and feeling that oneness. And so he ends just very poetically, again, as is the life of the saints. He ends his life really where his life actually began, which was in the, I always have trouble saying it, so I've spelled it out phonetically, Portiuncula. So this, again, this little tiny temple which you can go to, and there's a giant, enormous temple surrounding it, but just right in the middle of it is this sweet, tiny little church that St. Francis rebuilt with his own hands, and we spoke about it the first day that we were all together, the Temple of Mary of Angels. And so he returns home, returning to the mother, which is, again, so beautiful and poetic. And here he is at the end of his life, and he's singing. And the Canticle of the Creatures, which is, of course, the famous poem that St. Francis, I keep wanting to say Yogananda, that St. Francis wrote. Swami Kriyananda set it to music in Italian, and Sai Ganesh is going to sing it for us. And it's so beautiful that I always imagined he was singing the Canticle on his deathbed, because he was just singing on his deathbed. But of course, as I realized today with Sai Ganesh, he wrote it as a poem, and then it was set to music later. So he wasn't actually singing the canticle on his deathbed, but he was singing the Psalm of David on his deathbed. And here he was lying and just leaving his body so weak. And just a few beautiful stories. Brother Leo was watching him, and again, Brother Leo was his his closest disciple, and really his confidant in so much of his life. And Brother Leo was watching him, and he intuited at the end of St. Francis's life, he took Francis's robes off, and he offered Francis his own robes. And he said, I'm offering you these robes to borrow. And it touched Francis so deeply because Francis wanted to leave his life honoring Lady Poverty, owning nothing, having nothing, and that his closest disciple would intuit that, and he took off his own robes and he said, I'm loaning you these robes to borrow. And he left his body owning nothing, possessing nothing for himself. He'd already given everything of himself away. You know, there's so many stories that I didn't even get to share or tell. But before he receives the stigmata, he's praying one evening on Mount Laverna in deep contemplation. And Brother Leo every night would come to meet him and check on him. And he would stand at the base of this bridge and he would call out to Francis. And Francis said, if I don't call out, just leave me. I'm in the woods with my Divine Mother. And he calls out to Francis one evening across the bridge and he doesn't hear any response. But instead of turning back, he's so intrigued and he wants to be so close to Francis that he goes across the bridge and he sort of spies on Francis. He's looking down on Francis, and Francis is in deep contemplation, and he sees, what Brother Leo sees is that a flame of God comes down right in front of St. Francis, and it's burning right in front of him. And he sees, all he sees is St. Francis doing this 3 times, just offering from his heart up into this flame. And he later asked St. Francis, because St. Francis, of course, knows everything. He tried to sneak away, but Francis calls him back and says, why were you looking, why were you spying? And he said, I just couldn't help it. I needed to be near you. And Francis was so touched. And so Brother Leo sort of sheepishly asks, what were you saying to the divine? And what were you offering? And the experience that he recounts is that this flame of the divine comes to him and says, what do you have to offer me? And St. Francis says, I've given you everything. All I have are these robes. I have nothing to offer you. I've given you everything. And God answers to him, put your hand at your breast and at your heart. I was trying not to touch the mic. Put your hand at your heart and offer what you find there. And he closes his eyes and he puts his hand at his heart and he sees a giant golden coin appears in his heart, and he offers it up to the divine. And then the divine says to him again, what else can you offer me? And he says again, I have nothing, I've given you everything. And 2 more times the divine says, put your hand at your heart and offer to me. So he offers 3 gold coins to the divine. And he says to St. Francis later that he realized, I don't know why I'm looking at my notes, I know them, that these 3 coins represented the holy golden obedience, the very great poverty, and holy chastity. Right? These 3 words, obedience, poverty, chastity, qualities that St. Francis lived by so beautifully, that he just offered them into the divine in that final offering, self-offering of everything that he had. And so to come all the way back to his deathbed now, here he was lying on his deathbed, completely dissolved, nothing left to give. And even the robes on his back are taken away from him, so he has nothing. And for modesty's sake, his dear disciple offers him his robes. But again, as I shared earlier, he said, once my body is gone, let me lie naked in front of my Divine Mother, in front of my Heavenly Father. And so they leave him, and they leave him lying for a few hours or so, just on the floor, so that he can be stripped in front of his divine. But on his deathbed, many of his brothers were there, and he's just singing the Psalm of David, just singing out, crying out, singing. And there's always one sort of, pompous, or one brother who just kind of loses his way. I think the word they used to describe him was pompous, and I was thinking just every group of disciples has that one who's just stuck in the world a little too much, who's concerned out of goodness of the heart and out of a way, it's the way that Maya and the ego tricks us. Brother Elias was thinking he was doing what was right for the order. And he was saying to St. Francis, you have to stop singing. There are hundreds of people outside. And you have to be austere. You're dying, you're leaving. What are people going to think if you're just singing for joy? And St. Francis's response was, I cannot help it, I must sing. And there's a beautiful translation at the end of that I read today. And someone said, of course, St. Francis needed to sing because St. Francis wasn't singing at this point in his life as he's leaving the body, giving everything back, merging into the divine. St. Francis becomes the song. His very life, his very soul, everything that he is becomes the song itself. And so when Brother Elias is saying, what are people going to think? Stop singing. He cannot help but sing out. He cannot help but merge into that glorious, harmonious symphony of Divine Mother, because he's, to use the words that, what is it that Asha just gave a class on this, winning the race, right? I think that's what she called it. She gave a class on death and dying and winning the race of the final test, as Swami Kriyananda called it, just complete absorption into Divine Mother. And that's such a beautiful way for us to look at it, that we become the song. The more that we attune to God, the more that we give our life, our work, our humility, our joy, our not obedience, poverty, and chastity. We get to say our cooperative obedience, our simplicity, and our self-control. That's how Yogananda redefined obedience, chastity, and poverty for us, which is so beautiful. Instead of chastity, we get to practice self-control, to control the self, to withdraw the energy, to ask what is right for my next step, what is bringing me closer to the divine. Cooperative obedience, how can I open my heart to be a part of everyone and everything? And simplicity, how can I strip away that which I don't need to hear the divine? We can't hear God if we're not listening. And we can't listen if we're too loud, if there's too much noise that's happening all around us. And when we finally merge and align all of these aspects of our self, and we get to dissolve that ego, we become the song. And we just sing out with joy. We cry out to the divine. Someone says, stop singing, I can't help. I feel God in everything. I feel that melody flowing through me, which is where it brings us to the canticle, which Sai Ganesh is going to sing for us now in just a moment here, which is, of course, the story of, or the poem that St. Francis wrote, which is celebrating God in everything and in everyone. I think we'll just listen to it rather than reading it. Most of us know much of the translation. But as you're hearing Sai Ganesh sing, just tune into and feeling that wave of energy that is St. Francis as the song, that is St. Francis skipping through all creation, uplifting every single one of us.
Altissimo, omnipotente, buon Signore, tue son le laude, la gloria et l'onore, et ogni benedizione, a te solo se confanno et nullo è degno de nominarte. Laudato sia Dio mio Signore, con tutte le tue creature, specialmente le meserlo frate sole, la quale giorna et illumina lui per lui, et eloi è bello et radiante, con grande splendore de te, Signore, porta significazione. Laudato sia mio Signore, per sorluna e per le stelle in cielo le hai formato chiare et belle. Laudato sia mio Signore, per frate vento et per l'aire, et nuvolo et sereno, et omni Laudato sia mio Signore per nostra Madre Terra, la quale ne sostenta et governa et produce diversi frutti et colorati fiori et herbe. Laudato et benedicite mio Signore et regratiate et servite a Lui cum grande humilitate, cum grande humilitate.
Did you want to read anything about it? You don't have to. But
I will read just a few words that Swami Kriyananda wrote about it. It's a longer description that he wrote. We will never know whether St. Francis was singing or not. He says, I'm going to just read a part of it. I strongly visualized him as he was described when he first sang it to Sister Clare and a brother monk. Legend tells us that he had risen from his deathbed and was leaning upright against a tree, blind and very ill, but triumphant in the joy he felt in his love for God. When the image came clearly to my mind, I offered it up in prayer and asked to hear St. Francis himself singing that song. To my great joy, the melody came to me instantly. It is one that could be expanded or contracted to fit every stanza of the poem, and it expressed, at least to my satisfaction, the power and the beauty of the words.
beautiful. You can stay because we're actually just going to end with, we've talked enough for tonight. So we'll just end with our All Sing. Make Us Channels is a song that we heard last week. It's probably the song that's most notably connected with St. Francis here at Ananda. And so we'll sing it through in Italian first and then English twice through, so you guys can join in on either. You can try the Italian if you want to give it a shot and just sing along with us. And James is going to come up and sing too. This one's a D, is that right?
No, let's do G and C. Or just C is fine.
I can do G. Let's offer this as our final prayer and gratitude to St. Francis. Oh yeah, me.
Oh Signore mio altissimo, la mia vita dedico a te, le fatiche, gioia e dolor, il piacere e la melodia. Fammi mezzo della pace tua, quando hai buio guidami dal cielo, dove offesa ch'io poti perdon, dove l'odio ch'io poti l'amor. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee, all our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace, when in
there's hatred, may we share thy love. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share thy love. Let's just end our evening with a prayer. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and our beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yogananda ji, saints and sages of all religions, dearest St. Francis, be with us always. Help us to feel your divine melody flowing through our every thought. Help us to uplift our consciousness, to merge into your love, that we may share your light, your hope, and your joy with all whom we meet. Om. Peace. Amen.